Senator Kyle, you're going to go out of order. I realize you have other matters. I thank Senator Sessions for agreeing that. Please go ahead, sir. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Sessions. Mr. Attorney General, I had some other questions on the subject we've mostly dealt with this morning. I'll ask those for the record. But I want to turn to the media shield discussion, which you and I talked about on November 4th. You had indicated your willingness to address that at more length in a hearing, and I'm hopeful that the chairman will call a hearing at which you could express your views in more detail than you did in the views letter that was sent to us recently. Did you consult with Secretary Gates in determining to support the current version of the legislation, the media shield legislation?
Secretary Gates?
Yes, the Secretary of Defense. The reason I ask is that you said in your confirmation hearing that you would do so.
Yeah, I believe we've had conversations about it. I'm trying to remember the extent to which I've had this conversation. I don't think we've had a major conversation about this, but I think I've discussed it with him.
Well, the reason I ask is I'll just quote a small portion of the letter that he wrote to us concerning the bill. He said the bill would undermine our ability to protect national security information and intelligence sources and methods and could seriously impede investigations of unauthorized disclosures. Okay. In view of that strong opinion, and incidentally he was joined in that by several other members, people in position of authority in our intelligence and national security community, it seems to me that it would be important for us to hear from them, and certainly, Mr. Attorney General, for you to weigh their views before expressing absolute support for a bill which you say should not be amended in any additional way.
Well, I think first off, the letter that you quote from Secretary Gates deals with a prior version of the bill.
It does indeed. There were a couple of major changes made, actually several changes, a couple which in my view would arguably make the situation worse. But what I'm going to propose is that we talk to all of the people who have expressed a view about the previous legislation, since many of its provisions remain in the bill that you have supported. Did you consult with the FBI director?
Yes, I've talked to Bob about that.
Did you tell him that this was going to be the result, or did you elicit his, did he express any concerns?
Well, I guess I would, we certainly have discussed it. I know that he has taken a different position, at least with regard to a prior bill before. I think that he understood the position that I took, and I think he, accepted, where I was coming from with regard to this present form of the media shield legislation.
I appreciate it. He had expressed as recently as September that his views were the same as previously expressed in opposition to the bill, which is why I asked. United States Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, who's been commented on, has recommended that the law include another provision, and I want to just specifically ask you about this. It's in effect an offer of proof under which the information that's being sought by the government would be provided to the court in camera, and only if the government prevailed, utilizing all of the provisions of the law, would the information be then turned over. If the government didn't prevail, then obviously it wouldn't. You have previously, again in the confirmation hearing, said that that seemed like a reasonable requirement. Would you be open to having a provision like that added to the legislation? I know in your views letter you said you don't want to see any other amendments, but there are a few amendments that seems to me make sense, and that clearly is one that both you and I and Mr. Fitzgerald think is reasonable.
Well, the bill as it presently exists is a compromise, and I can...
Well, excuse me, it's a compromise between the journalists and you all and Democratic members of the Senate. Nobody's talked to me, and I've been noting my concerns about this bill for a long time.
Well, I think there are, I think this is right, but I think Senator Graham on the Republican side is a co-sponsor. I believe that that's true.
That's right. None of us who are opposed to it were consulted when the so-called compromise was put together. I just want to make it clear in case you had any doubt about that.
That's fair. Okay. And so the views letter was to express the concern, I think, that we had that in its present form, this is something that is satisfactory to us in law enforcement.
Okay. Could I just interrupt you? I've only got 19 seconds left. Just to make the point that I would hope you'd be open to the suggestion that I just made and a couple of others, if I could bring those to your attention. And last, your letter did not comment on the new, in effect, absolute privilege in one sense, and I'm curious about why you were silent, and would, again, elicit your views on that in the future, if not today, on the privilege extending to protect those who actually violate federal law by leaking the information itself. In other words, that act of leaking would be subject to the privilege, would be privileged. And I just wonder that the letter didn't express itself on that, and that seemed to me to be new and odd, and I really wanted to get your views on that.
I didn't see an absolute privilege to leak. I mean, it seems to me that there are provisions within the bill that deal with leaks and how they can be dealt with, and there are certain steps that the government has to go through in order to prosecute or get information from a reporter in connection with a leak investigation. But I don't think that the steps that the government has to go through are necessarily going to frustrate our efforts to identify and ultimately prosecute leakers.
Good. Then what I want to do, since I'm over the time, is to show you Section 3 and have you show me why that doesn't provide, in effect, an absolute privilege here not to disclose information where the crime itself is the leak. I hope we'll have a further opportunity to talk about that and some other concerns that I have about the bill. Thank you.
That's fine. And one thing, if I could just add, in response to Senator Kyle, I guess, was asking the question on behalf of Senator Grassley before, I didn't mean to be flip when I said that I would consider the request about turning over the names of people who had previous representations that might conflict with their duties as Department of Justice attorneys. When I said I would consider it, I only meant to say that I don't know if there are ethical concerns with regard to attorney-client privilege and things of that nature, and I needed to consider those before I would actually be able to respond to the question. So I didn't mean to say that I was trying not to be responsive or not taking seriously a question that was posed, I guess, initially by Senator Grassley and then by you, Senator Kyle. I just wanted to talk to the experts back at the department about whether there's an ethical concern in responding to the question.
Thank you. I suspect that you and Senator Grassley will have more conversations about that.
Okay. All right.